So, good evening. Thank you again for being part of our Let's Chat Mental Health series. These monthly sessions are meant to raise awareness, offer resources, and reduce stigma. I'm Mason Hostat with Garco County Public Health, and the 30th of March is World Bipolar Day. And so I thought it would be good to discuss this misunderstood, misdiagnosed at times, and mismanaged mental health issue. This is a topic that I have little understanding in, which is fine, which is great, because I feel ready to learn. I'm gonna do a lot of listening, so you two will have to do some talking.
Yeah.
We'll begin with introductions and a question. Now and I normally ask, why is this work important? But I think I feel free to deviate today. And what I would like to know is what you do for your mental health.
So I'll start. I'm Jared Rollins, a social worker. And as Mason knows, I love birds. So one of the things that I do for my mental health is I'll go outside often and just listen to, look for different birds.
Bird watching.
It's bird.
There's a difference.
There's a difference.
Okay. See, I'm learning already.
And only bird nerds will tell you that bird watching and birding are different.
Yeah, it's a faux pas. But all kidding aside, that is what I do for my
Nice.
for my mental health. And I have an intern, and her name is Renee Prince, and she talks a lot about this idea of collective care. You know, in our field, they talk about self-care a lot,
Right.
And that's, I couldn't just rely on the birds, so I have talked to my team a lot, talk to the folks that are in this work, and that's like a big thing that I do for mental health.
Yeah, so good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Allison. I am a licensed clinical social worker also. And what do I do? Yeah, so doing a lot of working on my vagal nerve. So I do a lot of sound therapy, which includes like binaural beats to put me into a more relaxed state, because there's lots that makes us anxious today. So
I also do vagus nerve work through like bringing on my polyvagal nerve deck. I have a pulsetto, which
I do too. Yeah.
External stimulation of the vagus nerve.
Yeah, it can really help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. So we always begin with the basics so that everyone can have an understanding of the topic. So let's just dive right in. What is bipolar? And how is it different than other mental health issues?
I'll begin.
Okay.
So I think it's important to say, like, bipolar is a diagnosis. It's a bipolar 1, bipolar 2. There's also something in that same classification called cyclothymic disorder, similar in presentation. And it is like any other, I would say it's like any other mental health diagnosis. It's based on a set of symptoms and a set of criteria that is observable and reportable by individuals that are experiencing these symptoms. And it's a little different in its presentation than others, just like anything else. But I think it carries more stigma than many of the other diagnoses that we talk about, which I know we'll get into at the end.
Okay.
Is stigma. But it's characterized by not really mood swings, but mood states that last a specific amount of time. And so it's characterized by symptoms of mania that have to be present, which would be like feeling like you are driven by a motor. You can't be, or you have a lot of goal-directed activities. You're engaging in risky behaviors. For bipolar 1, it's more than a week, lasts at least 1 week. It could last longer. And then characterized by the other side, which is depression. That lasts at least 2 weeks. So those are like, and then we'll get into, I think we'll get into the nuances of like 1 and 2.
Mhm.
But what do you?
No, yeah, that explains the symptoms and maybe just highlight how it can be a quick shift. Right, like, which is one of the signs is that it to shift quickly from one to the other.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good point. That like idea that it can be like a couple days of people, oftentimes people don't sleep, right? Like that's a big sign, or they don't need a lot of sleep. And then all of a sudden they're into this like manic, or we'll say hypomanic state. And that happens, yeah, you're right. That happens so quickly for folks.
So, and maybe this is getting into the nuances too quickly, but it can also end up being where it could be 6 months of one state or the other. Two, just to make it clear that it doesn't have to be just a week and then
Yeah, right. Like so what I
that's
was
cyclic.
yeah, what I was pulling from was called the DSM. So you'll often hear like it's the DSM-5 now,
Mhm.
which is our diagnostic statistical manual. So like where all these disorders come from. And really, like to your point, it lasts at least a
Yeah.
week or at least
Yeah.
2 weeks. So it could last, yeah, a lot longer.
Okay, so the idea being that for someone to, one of the characteristic symptoms is that there is the change from one state to another. And for like bipolar one, the manic state needs to be at least a week.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's just the understanding that it can be longer than a week, right? It's not just like a week and it shuts off.
Mhm.
It can be longer, but for somebody to come in and have that diagnosis, the episode has to be at least a week.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So then let's talk, I've seen when I was doing some research, I didn't do a lot because I wanted to learn more. I've seen it as bipolar, so like bipolar day. I've seen it as bipolar disorder. Is bipolar a disorder? And just talk about like that idea.
Well, you're the diagnostician, so
Again, and I'll tell, yeah, I think to your point, like I'm coming at it from a
The
clinical,
DSM,
yeah, like a
yeah.
clinical perspective. Um, so in this case, yes, it's a diagnosis, it's a disorder. I do think bipolar has made it, just the term bipolar, that adjective, has made its way into the vernacular of the of society.
Okay.
And so I do think it gets misused quite a bit.
Okay.
But if somebody has like true bipolar disorder, it's really impactful and distressing for their life. Whereas if somebody is just like, oh, I hear this often. I'm bipolar.
Right.
It's like, no, it's normal to.
We all have mood swings.
Yeah, exactly.
For
Right.
sure.
Yeah, we all have
Right.
some mood swings. And they're not distressing, or they can be, but they're not impactful and they're not distressing to most people's daily life.
Yeah, and so I don't know if this is the timing for this, but that idea of it really being almost evidence of being almost biological or chemical, right? Which differentiates it then just like a mood, the way you and I experience, although maybe I have bipolar, nobody knows, right? So, but that idea of really feeling it in your body.
Yeah, there is a big a hypothesis that it is like a neurodevelopmental disorder,
Okay.
like schizophrenia, or even like an autism spectrum disorder.
Okay.
Because there is a genetic component to it. There's an environmental component to it. and that is really like the hypothesis that's explaining it right now.
Okay.
But it's not like one gene does it.
Right.
It's multiple genes. They don't know exactly what gene does it, or what gene is turned on during some of those like environmental shifts for folks. So yeah, so it's a lot of it's multifactorial, multi genes that cause bipolar disorder.
And I just get to bring in as the layperson again. When a mental health issue becomes a disorder is when it interrupts activities of daily life, somebody's ability to work or go to school. So activities of daily life, showering, eating, sleeping, your work, whether that be you have to go to school or you have to actually go to your job. And then the last one is your relationships. And so, if it's impacting those three things, it's more likely than not a disorder, at least for us lay people, right? Because it's yeah, like you said, it's causing distress and disorder in somebody's life at times.
But what makes it so complicated is that it could be any one of those other disorders. So differentiating it from the evidence of, oh, maybe it's a personality disorder, maybe it's a autistic expression, maybe it's schizophrenia, makes it really hard to drill down. I think what I've come out of understanding to say bipolar is the cyclic nature of it. And you can almost ask a person, depending on how long they've lived, it's almost like it gets to be a timing thing.
Okay.
My cycle is 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, right? It can become that specific.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, it's not typically that like rapid cycling is what that would be. Usually it's like over the course of months, right? There's like
Okay, sure.
it's like the depression. Really, it's like the depression lasts longer
Right.
than the mania. Something usually interrupts the mania.
Our bodies can't take that much mania,
Yeah.
maybe.
And
right.
and society doesn't tolerate it. Like honestly,
There you go.
it's like what ends up happening.
Society would prefer us to be depressed, right?
Well, maybe, yeah, maybe. Okay.
Okay. So let's talk about some of those nuances, and we can kind of put these all together.
Yeah.
What differentiates bipolar from unipolar? Like unipolar depression for people. And then what are the differences between types 1 and 2 bipolar?
I've never even heard the term unipolar.
I didn't until I was on the NAMI website.
Okay. So really, if you think of like unipolar, it's just like okay, so we have the Earth. Bipolar, we're a bipolar Earth. So there's a North Pole and a South Pole.
Okay.
Imagine those like bipolar is we have if the North Pole would be like the manic symptoms, South Pole would be depressive symptoms. If we were a unipolar, there would be only one pole, and it would just be depression. Is typically how that's described. Most people are not described as unipolarly manic or hypomanic.
Okay.
So typically that's how it shows up. It's like depression.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
Sure.
the idea there.
Okay.
And at that point, we could say unipolar would be like major depressive disorder. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I see.
And I think that's like the main difference is bipolar disorder is there's the manic symptoms, hypomanic symptoms, and then there's depression. That's your emotional or your mood register is vastly greater than what a neurotypical person would have as their like mood register. So that's what I kind of think about too.
But go ahead with, so kind of talk me through what differentiates 1 and 2.
That to me is like is extremely nuanced, and really because we're relying on individuals telling of it and history telling of it. So, because we're not just observing somebody for, like 20 years of their life, and we can say, oh yeah, this is hypomania, this is mania, and then this is depression. So really like the biggest difference, again, within the DSM is the length of time within each mood state. So bipolar 1 is that like you're in that manic state for at least 1 week. Could be it could be a lot longer if nothing interrupts that. Another signifier there is if somebody would have that manic episode or be bipolar 1 if they went to the hospital. Oftentimes we see these individuals have contact with law enforcement, get arrested, then that's one way that is changed. That course of that manic episode is changed. And then okay, so that's bipolar 1.
Okay.
There's that manic state and the depressive state. Bipolar 2 is there's a hypomanic state, which just means it's like less time.
Okay.
There's still the same criteria, but it's not as intense, not meeting as many of the risky behaviors, but they can all present very similarly, and in just a shorter amount of time in the hypomanic state.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So hypomania versus, so when I would think of like mania, I would think of like hyper.
Mm-hmm.
Is hyper different than hypo? I mean, and obviously they are compared. If you're hypoglycemic, you are low in sugar. If you're hyperglycemic.
Yeah. Yes. So that's like a good way to think of it. It's just like less mania.
Oh,
just less mania.
Okay.
So hypermania, it would be one way to say it, and then hypo, it's just like a little bit less. Still having mania, still having these like very goal-directed behaviors. That people would start a lot of projects, be very can't sleep. Yeah, again, sleep is like one of those big ones. If you have, like, I've had a few clients over the course of my career who've been in like a true manic state. In my office, they cannot sit through a whole session. Like they'll get up and leave in the middle of the session because they just can't sit still.
Okay.
Whereas somebody who's hypomanic possibly could. They'll
Tap in their feet.
They'll have that kind
agitated.
that kind of energy, but they can tolerate a session essentially. I don't know, what's your experience?
Yeah, no, that sounds right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think the sleep is really ties you in to those states.
And so thinking about that and the nuance, should we really be thinking about bipolar as a spectrum? We use spectrums as a lot of ways to describe, the autism spectrum disorder is the one that comes to mind, but should we be thinking of it as a spectrum?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Mhm.
I think it is because so maybe there's overlying other diagnoses that need to be brought into this discussion, such as like OCD, right? Because somebody who's manic can appear very OCD and anxious about perfection. And it's, as a therapist, somebody presenting to me with high anxiety, perfectionism, I want to get underneath what's driving that. Is it, a genetic component, or is it family of origin stuff that's got their brains set up to just constantly be saying, I got to achieve, I got to do everything right. And then they hit that brick wall that we all do of, and just, and so that can look very bipolar. so it's very nuanced and diagnosing is, and maybe bipolar one, it's a little bit like, oh my gosh, this is what's happening here. But that whole bipolar two, gets a little bit, yeah.
No, I do think it is. I do think both of them are hard to diagnose.
Mhm.
And they are very nuanced, and I do think it's on the spectrum. I think when let's like everything in the DSM, mild, moderate, severe, and how it's impacting somebody, and the level of intervention and treatment that's required. Right. So if we make that analogy of like somebody on the autism spectrum, if they're at like a level one, there's like less intervention, not needing as much of that kind of, not needing as much as kind of intensive outside support. Yeah, that's same thing with like a bipolar disorder on that same spectrum. Yeah. And the other thing is it gets complicated in diagnosing when we introduce substances. So that makes things even more complicated in terms of, is it the alcohol that's driving the depression? Is it the cannabis that's increasing the mania, or is it a stimulant that's increasing the mania? How long has the person been not using substances? When did they start using substances, and then when did the mania occur? That makes things really complicated in diagnosing, and can be tricky.
So after I wrote these questions, there were some things that I wanted to ask, and when this kind of goes together, but we did kind of talk about their mental health issues. Are there factors associated with developing bipolar? And are there differences in the way that they present in men and women? So you can break those up. Let's ask two questions. Are there risk factors for developing bipolar? And we've talked kind of genetics, but we don't necessarily fully know that part yet.
Well, I like to use the word epigenetics because that is a term that encompasses all the environmental nature and nurture. And we don't know the influences, even say, of European ancestors on our DNA, and what they had to go through in the potato famine. Okay, right? Like those type of epigenetic influences, and how they show up in our DNA and in our genetics. And so you're born in, God says, I'm putting you into this family, whatever it is, and those environmental factors are can end up like triggering genetic propensity that you already have, and what's the word? Make it worse. And we see this in the ACE study, adverse childhood experience studies, where certainly the environment, the propensity to have a bipolar disorder diagnosis is much higher, the higher your number goes in your ACE score.
Yeah, that's really the if you look at the research, that's really the biggest thing, are those ACEs, those adverse childhood experiences. The more of those you have, the more likelihood you're gonna turn on these genes. This is really what the research says. And then if you have that, again, that predisposition, that is a big one. And then what we know is that cannabis use among teenagers also really turns on those genes, the gene expression.
Wow. Yeah.
Before the age of 25, the developing brain.
Yeah. So the more being hopeful the longer we can, whatever, keep somebody from using a lot of substances, cannabis especially, nicotine is also, it's like insidiously there. As like something that can turn on these genes. And alcohol use, the more protective we are against, the more we can be protected against this diagnosis.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then the other thing too, thinking about men and women and the ways in which it might present. We know that there are different, so I'll let you guys talk. About possible differences men and women.
Well, I'll just say that the bipolar diagnosis is very quickly given to women. And so, is it society's judgment on women and emotion, the way they express their emotions versus the way a man expresses? And a manic stage is actually very well recognized by our society as a good thing. Oftentimes, right, like the driven CEO who, can achieve and has all the energy and even anger, oftentimes is given, more recognition. So there's a lot of controversy around the diagnosis, and as a social worker, and I want to ask, what's the environment that this person is in? Because oftentimes bipolar disorder is diagnosed when in actuality it's kind of betrayal trauma, or somebody who feels trapped in a relationship and doesn't know what to do, and so they try the fight or flight, and that gets, it gets judged quickly as bipolar.
I think from a very like basic perspective of prevalence, so how much it's diagnosed in a population, it's like with men it's 1.5% and women it's 1.6%. So there really isn't a difference.
Okay.
But I think you're right, because it's so much more stigmatized, and the label will be slapped on a woman more often, but they don't necessarily meet the criteria for it. So I think you're right? Like I think there's more stigma out there in how we're diagnosing, but when you drill down and like see, do they actually meet the criteria? Not really.
There you go. Okay.
So I think you're right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. Right.
So I think that's like that is the big difference. There's more stigma on women and how they present. One of the symptoms that people really focus on is like a hypersexuality that can go with a manic or hypomanic symptom or episode. In women, there's a ton more stigma on women when it comes to sexuality versus men.
Yeah.
Right. So like that's one of those things where it shows up like, okay, this woman's bipolar, she's hypersexualized. But a man wouldn't have that same label slapped.
Right.
So
yeah,
not necessarily a big difference. And even across cultures, like Latino or Native Americans, not a big difference in its presentation.
And I was also reading that it is one of the most, so even if you go into other countries, bipolar is usually diagnosed at the same rate, about like 2.6% of people. So, it's a pretty steady.
Yeah, I was just reading today to prepare.
Yeah.
I think the only country where that's not true is in Japan.
Oh.
It's less diagnosed.
Okay.
So.
Oh.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know
Wait,
I didn't get it. There was no like.
They're all robots.
No,
I'm sorry.
No,
it's just very,
Yeah, they're very.
There's some stoicism. Yeah, some collective
Thank
culture.
you. That's a great word. Yeah.
Very.
Black and white kind
parameter focused and black and white. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move into some treatment and resources. So, what are the main treatments for bipolar?
Just like with everything, medication alongside therapy.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah,
But I don't know enough, I'm not, I can't prescribe, so I only know a few of the medications out there, and I would assume they're pretty unique for bipolar because you're having to deal with both manic and depressive states.
right, so the classification in there, you'll be like, that people will be prescribed most of the time, if it is a bipolar diagnosis, is something called a mood stabilizer. And those go from like, lithium, which is a mineral, this is like medication wise, to, I'm gonna mess up a bunch of names, I believe lamotrigine, is one, and then there's some newer ones out there, like Vraylar is used. Again, yeah, a social worker, I don't know what, I'm not sure all the medications that are out there.
But it's basically the same that we would do for most mental health issues or challenges.
And that there are medications that can help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the hopeful thing, is that there are medications for, does every person who has bipolar need medication? Is that would be probably outside of the realm.
We need the
Yeah.
psychiatrist
No.
here that,
I don't think so. I think I did like a straw poll today. I had my little like
Oh, nice.
group supervision, and I asked them the same question.
Okay,
It was like 10 people. or
Okay.
so.
wow,
I asked them this very question, and I posed it in a very like, is this a necessary thing? And I think to the question before, like it's on a spectrum.
okay,
So depending on the severity and the environment that somebody is in, they don't necessarily need a medication,
a mood
a
stabilizer.
mood stabilizer or something like that.
okay.
Was kind of the consensus from this group of social workers. And I asked a couple of doctors this same question. And they said that same thing. So if the environment can be very supportive, if the treatment can be kind of this wraparound treatment, and the severity is not severe where they're rapid cycling, like you were saying, then I do think it is possible to have a non-medication based intervention. I think and I'll be honest, I think that's rare in our valley, because we don't have those great resources. The wraparound care isn't always there. It's pretty hard to make it. It's hard to make it in this valley. If
A lot
that
of
is like
stressors.
yeah, exactly. If like that is your main focus, your mental health, and trying to be whole and well, it can be a great challenge.
But there is, I'm hearing, I'm just going to draw out what you said with the belief that there's neuroplasticity, and there are things that we can do to kind of, practice the pause before your brain takes over, that bully brain that wants to put us into the manic mode. And there are ways of slowly training your brain again to be able to live in a more, I do trying to think of his name right now. He calls it the river of integration.
Yeah.
Okay. Chaos control.
Mm-hmm.
Bang, 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 bang. We live our lives like that.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm not diagnosing as a specifically bipolar diagnosis, but we all live that way. And instead, if we could live that more like this, and start recognizing when we're about to hit, the chaos stage.
Yeah. Right, and imagine if that chaos was like, if your river was the
really wide,
whatever the widest river is.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Mrs.
Like a delta.
I think then I don't know. But that's, so this was what was interesting, was when you were talking about your register, right?
Yeah, they like mood register.
Your mood register was, I was totally thinking about the river, that, and I don't know that person, but trying to live within, the boundaries and not necessarily going too far out, because then that causes you to go too far down.
But you can actually get so that you can feel it happening in your body and kind of catch it. And provide yourself with the things you need and create an environment. And I wish we could do more here in this valley for places that we could go to feel safe. And
And there are very, there are evidence-based treatments and therapies, not just the medication for this diagnosis. Some of the common you'll see if you research anything, you'll always see cognitive behavioral therapy. That's always at the it's always at the top. It's an easy one to research. But there's this one I use often with anybody who has a mood disorder. Is called interpersonal social rhythm therapy. Where essentially you're trying to it's another way to manage that river and that mood, those mood shifts, is by creating, essentially you're trying to create a good circadian rhythm, like a good biological rhythm. And you do it by getting up at the same time, eating at the same time. If you're going to watch a show, there's a lot of great TV.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A lot of great TV. Watch the TV at the same time, or read or play a video game at the same time, and don't just play video games for 8 hours. Stay up till 3.
use your watch.
Yeah, and
timing.
and that's like an intervention to help regulate those moods, those the bipolarity of somebody. And families if possible, families should always be involved in this kind of work.
That's my next question. What a segue. How can family and friends support those in our lives who may have bipolar?
I think, doing their own rhythm work and help with modeling and creating that environment so that it's a little bit easier to do that. So that you're not, I talk about the pinball machine, right? Like you can feel sometimes like life is a pinball machine and everybody's kind of hitting each other, and being that stable bumper. Yeah, you're going to get hit, but being able to stay solid with your inner core work like that.
That's good. And so tilt, in pinball machine.
Oh, it's tilt. Like a pinball machine?
Yeah, if you tilt a pinball machine too much, it shuts down.
Yeah.
For 30 seconds. So you want to avoid the tilting.
There you go. I love it.
So you don't shut
I'll
down.
put that into my, thank you. Great.
But that's it. I like that. I think that makes forward. I think one of the things where one symptom of any kind of pretty serious mental illness can be a lack of awareness of the symptoms and a lack of an awareness of what the individual with the diagnosis is experiencing. That's one of the it's one of the insidious things about mental health, is that we're not always aware of what's happening to us when we're in it. And so the people around us, our friends, our families, can often see these things. And so the friends and families can just be aware, if somebody is starting to be aware of those signs, and if somebody's drinking a lot more or smoking a lot more, just in a kind and compassionate way, being like, "Hey, man, I've noticed this change or this shift in you. What's how can we help?" Kind of just reaching out, kind of thing. So I think that's one way. And not pulling away. I think again, there's a lot of stigma with this diagnosis. And oftentimes we'll pull away or we'll be scared to intervene.
Or dismissing.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of the line, oh, she's just on her period.
Yeah.
Right, like, oh, it's just hormones, when in actuality, it's an actual diagnosis and needs to be like you said, both men and women are truly have the diagnosis at about the same rate. So we can't just dismiss it for, gender reasons or whatever, yeah.
And so like, and just educating yourself about this thing. There's a
Mm.
good National Alliance on Mental Illness has a lot of good resources and a lot of truth as far as like what's out there or what ways to help, because a lot of what's out there is like in the media, is sensationalized and
Right.
and scary, and that's typically not the case.
Right.
I mean, that's another great segue. We'll try and keep it.
Setting them up and
Yeah.
knocking them down.
Knocking them down. Let's talk about some stigmas. What are common stigmas that are associated with bipolar?
Well, I think what he just said about this idea of kind of not just the lack of awareness, and it's actually a very small tweak that we could all do to become a little bit more educated on mental illness so that it's not so scary. And like you just said, right, like not everyone has severe bipolar. The minute people hear that, though, they're like, and how do I handle this and how do I deal with this? Well, yeah, it's really just understanding, and everybody can relate to what it feels like to be agitated and frustrated, or and so yeah.
I think that this is one of those diagnoses that I think most people would say that person is crazy.
Mm.
And it's been one of my first jobs ever. I worked with I worked in essentially as like a group home community for folks that had been diagnosed with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or schizoaffective disorder, which I don't know. We shouldn't even get into that. That's too big of a
Yeah. Yep.
Next time.
Next time. Yeah, next time. And that was like one of the that word that like, oh, people think I'm crazy or something like that, was one of the words that was really hurtful to folks. And so and I don't expect everyone to do this, but I don't use that word because of that like experience that I had with people who have been diagnosed with but a lot of bipolar. When really what it is, it's yes, there's these manic states, but the depressive symptoms after that are really the thing that like is debilitating.
Painful.
And painful. That's absolutely painful. And it should also be said, the risk of suicide when somebody has this diagnosis is at least with bipolar 1, I think it was like 20 to 30 times higher than somebody who does not have this diagnosis. So there's a lot of stigma there as well.
Yeah. And so, just thinking about the manic side, right? Because it used to be manic depression. Why does that image still kind of persist where like somebody is wild and crazy but what I keep hearing you say is that these are really goal-oriented or goal-directed behaviors, which sound like they're very, like you said, very much in line with somebody who might be running a business or something, but we have this, just conjuring up, gender, but we have this woman with wild hair and 27 cats and
I think because that's what people see, and like that's what would be reported in the newspaper is somebody doing something wild. They would be on the police blotter, that somehow we still have in this day and age, for being found somewhere they weren't supposed to be, and they were linked or something. There's these like sensationalized stories that people hold on to and have been. They get reported every time it happens. Yeah. And so that continues to persist.
Well, what I find interesting about risky behavior is, and I like to bring this up, especially for those of us that live in this valley where extreme sports are like a thing. And, you know, there's a certain psychology behind that kind of extreme risk taking, you know, to which there's speculation, we're kind of getting into the topic of suicidality, but people are often surprised to hear that those with that high risk behavior that looks so goal oriented and cool and oh man, they're such a great skier are actually more the possibility of them contemplating suicide is much higher because also they're also risk takers.
Right.
And
that's a great point. Where some of there's like it could be the hypomanic behaviors or even the manic behaviors could be they could be jumping off of a mountain in a parachute, which is celebrated here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
exactly.
when we do think about like suicide prevention, we do think, I mean, risk taking, your brain doesn't want you to die.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to work up to this idea that I can actually do this thing. So I could actually jump off of this very thing that would be.
And I don't care. And
Yeah, and
I'll
I
risk,
don't care.
I'll risk it all.
I will see what happens at the bottom. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Why do, well, what can we as communities do to reduce the stigma? I really appreciate this idea, like being more educated about mental illness in general, right? Because it does seem kind of scary when, you know, we see somebody, I mean, this is like maybe for somebody who has schizophrenia or something, maybe that they're talking to themselves. You know, I'm sure that somebody who is maybe having some hypomania or mania issues, that might happen to them, but you know, yeah, that can be scary to see that person, you know, is probably maybe not fully aware of where they are, who they are, when they are. Yeah. So sorry.
Is that a symptom of mania sometimes, or?
It can be. So again, this is like where we get like really nuanced.
Mm-hmm.
It can be. There's like we call it a specifier or a modifier where somebody can have bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 with psychotic features. And that can hit in the manic state, but it can also hit in the depressive state. So it can get very complicated. You can see those things in both of the mood states for folks.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's an educational point that gives us a little bit maybe more control, at least to be able to go like, oh, okay, that happens. People can get into that kind of a state, because your question is actually like, what can we do as a community? And how do we as community members lower our anxiety and feel confident about how to relate to someone who may be experiencing kind of like a psychotic break or state. And I think we can. I think we can learn how to, just like we do with a medical emergency, and rely on our medical team and the hospitals and know when it's important to call and get somebody into the ER, and yeah.
Sharing thoughts about how we as community members lay people.
It's a tough one. I don't have all the answers for this one. Like I maybe I'm up here and I sound like I know what I'm talking about. But this is it's a tricky one. This is one of those ones that like takes a community. It's not for like, again, if it's on the severity thing, it is not enough just to have a therapist. We should be engaging peers, we should be engaging family members, doctors. Again, to my like interpersonal social rhythm theory and therapy, we should be engaging gyms, all like a lot of different like, oh, there's a lot of things.
Holistic.
Yeah, we should
Wrap
really
around.
be doing wrapping around.
Yeah.
And I think that's like hard to do
Yeah.
in this
Especially in this valley, because we're all little microcosms and individual and so independent.
Yeah.
But I, you know, I'm sure even in Denver, there's that. But the resources are greater in a bigger town, for sure.
Yeah.
I like to say to my clients, it's a big world out there. And you can allow yourself to look toward resources. It's okay. You can go outside of the valley if you need to get all the resources you need, including maybe utilizing purely online
Right.
resources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to wrap up. I know, an hour is really never enough time. We just scratched the surface. But do we have any questions? Any comments? Okay. So I just want to take a
If
moment.
people do watch it later and do have questions, where should
They
they turn?
can contact me, Mason, it's mhostat@garfieldcountyco.gov. Yeah, it changed. But you can also utilize West Mountain Regional Health Alliance's resource list for mental health. They have a pretty good list of mental health resources and providers.
Headquarters.
I'm NAMI again, if you wanted to educate yourself on this bipolar. If you just go to NAMI and Google bipolar on their website. But yeah, I traditionally will send people to the West Mountain Regional Health Alliance resource list for providers. But if they have a specific question that I can funnel to others, that is my email address. But I want to thank you both for being here, giving us an opportunity to poke your brains a little. I wanted to say that doing these sessions monthly means a lot. So thank you to the library staff for giving us space. Thank you to those who watch. I do hope that you take away a sense of understanding and appreciation around mental health being part of your overall health. Our next session will be April 29th in Rifle, where we will be discussing bullying and mental health. Thank you all so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Mason.
Thank you.